For some reason, it keeps dropping the camera on and off automatically.
Oh, really? Is that
I say automatically.
It's just an Elgato issue, or
I don't know. It's been doing it for a wee while, so I just need to have a look.
technical problems?
Yep.
How's things been
screwed.
Anyway?
That's a technical term. No, it's all good this end. Yourself?
Yeah, not so bad. I was away in Birmingham yesterday with Rue. We were doing like an Entra ID security workshop.
Oh yeah, yes.
Kind of just like a session, really, more than anything. But yeah, it went really well. And he's in London today, delivering it again with another one of the sort of Threatscape team. Yeah, so everyone's been a bit busy and doing bits and pieces there. I've seen you've done some traveling, right? You've been to
it's over in Antwerp the last few days. So meeting up with a couple of my Belgian counterparts.
Nice.
Good couple of days. Nice people. Good weather over there. So
Good.
Just you know what it's like with the travel. It gets a bit hectic after a little while.
I definitely couldn't keep up with it. Well, I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday, and he was saying when he was working at Proofpoint, he was traveling like 3 to 4 days a week, like living out of a suitcase. And I was just like, no chance. You won't get me doing that.
Oh no, it's a lot of people think with that travel, it's hotels, you get to see cities. You don't really get to see the city because you're stuck in a hotel or in an office. And living out of a suitcase just isn't fun.
Nope. No, I totally agree. So traveling aside, shall we make a start to our episode 3, I guess? So I guess welcome to any watchers or listeners for episode 3 of Not Another Tech Podcast. And I guess kind of following on from our last episode, which was focused around privileged access workstations, kind of keeping in theme with that. We're going to talk about PIM, or privileged identity management, as it might be better known as. So I guess we'll start with a very quick intro or overview of, I guess, what PIM is. And essentially, it's a service that is included within Entra ID that allows organizations to sort of manage and control access to resources in a sort of just-in-time and just enough access approach, essentially. Allows you to enforce things like multi-factor authentication when activating access to a resource or access to a specific role.
Yep.
And it allows you to, like I said before, sort of have that just-in-time element. So, for example, rather than giving somebody standing access to security administrator, global administrator, whatever role it might be, you can allow someone to sort of activate and elevate into that role for a certain period of time, after which that role is then revoked. So nice handy feature that I think a lot of organizations use.
Yep, and it's not just at those roles. You can target it at groups and also Azure resources. So you can provide just-in-time access to Azure subscriptions, for example. So you want to control access there, or you want to apply a number of roles to a user rather than activating each role. I know there is a vote for let's be able to activate multiple roles at once. You can assign it to a group and then you activate into that group. It's a great tool to have.
Absolutely, and you make a really great point there. So one of the things that often is often asked to me is, okay, that's great. We can use PIM from within Entra, but actually, you mentioned there PIM for groups. PIM for groups is a really great way of extending PIM capabilities even into third-party applications. So, for example, where you might have enabled sort of single sign-on management to those third-party applications, if it can be managed via a security group, it can essentially be managed via PIM. So you can extend those PIM just-in-time capabilities to third-party applications as well, which is really great. There is some caveats. There is some caveats to, for example, you mentioned adding multiple roles to a group and then having PIM eligibility into the group. There are some sort of caveats around that. I think insofar as mainly the highly privileged roles. So some of the highly privileged roles have got sort of built-in protections. An example of that might be the global administrator. So I think it's the user administrator, for example, has the capability to reset users' passwords. And there is a built-in protection capability, for example, for global administrators, where if a user administrator tries to reset a global administrator's password, they can't do it. If you're assigned the global administrator via a group rather than directly, you don't inherit those protections.
Yep.
So worth calling that out.
But I guess this is where would you want to apply the global administrator as a group?
Exactly. Well, that's it. 100%. Yeah, totally agree. It's all about understanding that risk, right?
Yeah.
And trying to make a decision from there. Because it's funny you should say that, actually, because while it almost seems black and white that you wouldn't do that, there's lots of scenarios where I've had customers go to me, well, we kind of need to do that for one reason or another. And like I say, it doesn't just apply to sort of global administrators, it does apply to a couple of other roles as well.
It's always an interesting one. I mean, talking of global administrators, it's what's the most number of global administrators have you ever seen in a customer tenant before?
I mean, to be fair, I think the most I've ever seen is 12, which is still pretty high, to be fair. Yeah. Especially when you consider them, they were users' day-to-day accounts. That kind of makes it even worse.
Ooh, yeah.
But I mean, I know Microsoft have got that sort of banner that sits across the top of the roles page, and it sort of says, you shouldn't have more than 10 highly privileged roles or something along those lines. I mean,
5 GAs, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I've done some security assessments before. I've jumped in there, and it's been like, you have 339 highly privileged roles. It's like, wow. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and that probably tells you enough of what I've kind of seen.
Yeah. No, it's scary. I mean, I did some work for a customer, and they had 19 global admins, all permanently assigned. Nice. They did have separate admin accounts for the day-to-day accounts, which is good. So a cloud account for cloud administration, but they had 19 global admins, and 3 of them were generic accounts, so service account kind of things that they just assigned the GA role to, which is just baffling. Don't do it.
It's almost like that. Do you know what that reminds me of when people do that? It's like that sort of legacy mindset of when you're trying to set something up in on-prem AD, and it's like, just give it domain admin. If we give it domain admin, it works. So rather than trying to understand actually what permissions it needs, you just give it domain admin. I've seen that plenty of times as well. So is there so what roles do you typically see most people, I guess, managing through PIM? Do you kind of tend to see, all of them, or is it just a subsection of roles?
What I've seen in the past is definitely the GA role.
Yeah.
More and more people are slowly switching on to this whole thing of actually, let's do our global admin role through PIM.
Yeah.
And that customer where they had 19, it was very much a case of, right, who needs this still? What's it for? And then we went through and switched all of them down to PIM that needed it. And we actually dropped off, I think it was about 10 additional accounts. They just didn't need it.
Yeah.
And then the service administrator accounts, so Intune, security, user, teams, all those kind of roles I typically see as a PIM or a PIMable role.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to things like those people who got the help desk role as part of their job. There's always debate. Do they have a separate account to perform those tasks, or do they use their everyday account? Because they're still privileged tasks. So I would say, yes, use a separate account. Yeah. But sometimes customers like to say, well, it's a low level thing. It's just a password reset. But that's where the danger lies. That's not a low level thing. It's a password reset. It's secure.
And I think actually you make a really good point there that's worth sort of pointing out. It's not always black and white, and it's really easy as a security consultant to go, well, you should be doing this. But in reality, it does boil down to being pragmatic, understanding the customer, understanding their requirements, and trying to find that fine
100%.
line, which can be difficult and it can be frustrating. But unfortunately, that's just the way it works. You've got to deal with it.
Security shouldn't be complicated. It's common sense.
Yeah.
And it's what is deemed as a acceptable risk to the customer. It's like I had a chat with somebody recently about the whole virtual PAW thing. Yeah. And it was an interesting chat because they're Microsoft security. So they come from that very hardened endpoint of physical privileged access workstation. Has to be. And I get it, but that's not always practical for other businesses. And depending on your business type will determine your risk. And so like your global admins, your other admin accounts, it comes down to your business type, your security risks. What have you got as an acceptable risk? What do you have to mitigate? And what is, can you not let's go by, but you know what I mean? It's a case of what isn't as critical.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. And, you mentioned the sort of the virtual PAW there. And I think we kind of touched it on the last episode, but, it all ties in together, right? It's all about that risk appetite. And ultimately, having a virtual PAW is better than having no PAW at all.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
have something is better than nothing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah. And of course, when you are sort of thinking about that bigger picture, specifically, a lot of organizations nowadays, and for good reason, are trying to align with zero trust, right? And PIM is a great facilitator, if you like, for that, right? Because you've got that just in time, just enough sort of time-bound access to privileged resources or privileged access, and that kind of aligns with those zero trust principles, which is really great. And I guess even so, though, it can become, we've kind of already sort of said there that it can be a little bit frustrating, and you've got to try and find that balance. Typically, when you are sort of configuring PIM or at least advising your clients, what does that sort of look like for you from a configuration activation perspective? Is there a sort of like a baseline that you typically recommend?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I mean, one of the biggest discussions I've always had with customers, and I think you probably have the same, I know Rue has, is the approval for activation or not.
Yeah.
I get it. It's a great idea. But actually, if you're having to elevate your role to an admin, I'll say GA just for argument's sake, but we always get into that trap of, I just assign GA role because it's easy. Yeah. But if you're activating your GA role at 3:00 in the morning, who's going to be around to approve it for you?
Yeah.
My stance is, if you trust somebody enough to give them that role, why go through the process of activating, getting approval for activation? If it's their day job, why do they need to get approval to do their their task? Yeah. So that feature's nice, but in all honesty, I don't think it's needed. There are probably areas where it is needed, but in what you and I come across, that's one of the discussions I have.
I totally agree. I think while there are other mechanisms available within PIM that realistically do help enforce some sort of a security boundary around sort of the use of PIM, I'd say approvals doesn't really fit into that box, if you like. It's not really a security boundary unless the organization that's using it is practicing it properly. You mentioned there, if somebody's activating a role outside of hours, there's potentially going to be no one to approve it. That's kind of one scenario you could come into. Then also have the other scenario, which is people get bored of doing approvals. They don't even check to see, is it actually you that's activating this role? In which case, the approval becomes completely pointless.
Yep.
and it's no longer a security boundary.
That's like the old MFA fatigue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Attackers would just re-authenticate until some
fatigue, right?
I'll prove it to shut it up.
Absolutely. And I think there is a fine line there, and I think that there is a space for approvals, and again, it's very, very much dependent on the organization, and we've sort of like jumped back to the global admin a few times, but global admin is typically one where I try and steer people towards going down the approval route once they are mature with PIM. So once they have PIM in place,
that's actually good,
and they have a good strategy, they've already managed to define these are the roles that we need throughout our sort of day-to-day work, and we've got a good process in place for making sure the administrators are activating the right roles for the right tasks and all that kind of good stuff. Once they've got to that level of maturity, we then say, okay, let's have a look at global administrator. And actually, global admin, I feel, is probably one that is worthwhile adding approval in.
That's a really good point, because that then encourages people to use least level of privilege.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because if you've got global admin, you've got Exchange admin, you've got SharePoint admin, you've got Teams admin. Well, why not just go and activate global admin? Because then you can do everything.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing there. It's actually, if I've then got to go through approval for global admin, that's a bit of a ball ache. Yeah. So actually, I only need to do an Exchange task, so I'll enable my Exchange admin.
Absolutely. So from the admin's perspective, who's actually activating the role, it kind of should get them thinking, well, actually, it's probably just easier for me to go with the least privileged one. But likewise, it also requires the approvers to be, I guess, somewhat ruthless insofar as if someone's activating a role, confirming, is it you that's doing it? Why do you need it? And if an administrator goes, well, it was just easier for me to go to global admin, that needs to be rejected for that particular reason. Use the level of least privilege.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah,
I totally agree. On the other things, look at auth context for requiring MFA, because that's a trap I fell into a little while ago. It wasn't until I saw Rue's video on it, the whole thing of, well, I've got it to say I want MFA, but it's not prompting me for MFA. And once that was explained, it kind of made sense. It's frustrating, but actually use the auth context for it.
Absolutely. I have a really big problem with that. I also released a video recently on that, and
I think I saw that actually. Yeah,
frustrates the hell out of me. I don't know why. I mean, if anybody from Microsoft is listening, we need, even if it's just a little I next to that drop-down box that says, if you use the Azure MFA option, this does not require re-authentication. It uses the active MFA claim or something along those lines. You know, we recommend you use authentication context instead. And to be fair, if you go through to the PIM Microsoft Learn documentation, it does that. I think they do have a note in there that says something similar.
Just a little note.
But it should be, exactly, just a little note. But it should be in the configuration page underneath the role settings. Very frustrating. That catches so many people out. I see that in probably every single security assessment that I do. I run into that.
I mean, there's that question of, do you need MFA for the role? I would say yes, to activate it. It's always good to. Are privileged roles MFA'd more? Well, yeah, but you want it to be, because the whole idea is zero trust is assume breach and always verify. Yeah. So if I want to do something, I will, MFA is not hard, especially if you've got password lists set now. So that makes life a lot easier.
Absolutely. And it's not just about requiring initial re-authentication, but it's also, at least for me, requiring a stronger level of authentication. Yeah. So if you're gonna go ahead and activate, security administrator, for example, you might have already gone through the process of logging into the PIM portal. You maybe done the username and password and a Microsoft Authenticator push notification. But actually, in order to get that security admin role, we're going to say you need phish-resistant authentication and step it up a notch and sort of do that step-up authentication.
It should be used as phish-resistant MFA regardless.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're building out a good conditional access framework, all of your admins should be authenticating with fish resistant methods anyway.
Exactly.
Totally agree.
And then it comes to the time duration. I think that varies customer to customer, but also role to role. Because the default's 8 hours, isn't it? Microsoft give you the role for.
Yeah, I believe it is. Yeah, and you can adjust that. Yeah,
you can adjust it. The minimum, I think, is 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think it is 30 minutes. 30 minutes or an hour. Yeah.
So some roles, so help desk, for example, if that's their day job, then you want to have it activated for 8 hours because they're going to be in their environment all day doing the help desk tasks. So rather than having to go in each time and activate that role whenever they need to do a password reset or a username change or something, that's actually when it becomes a bit silly. So, they activate it when they come in the morning, and then when they leave at night, it deactivates. Okay, yeah, you've got that argument. What happens if they do overtime? Well, they just have to reactivate it again.
Yeah.
Well is that a role you could assign to them permanently? I wouldn't say so. You got these tools, so use them. GA role, do you want that activated for 8 hours? Well, why?
Yeah.
Does it have to be 8 hours? I mean, I worked with a customer, again, the one who had these 19 GAs. It's like, yeah, we're going to activate our global admin role for 8 hours. It's like, but why? So, because I'm doing my tasks. It's like, but does every task you do need the global admin role?
Exactly.
And then somebody said, well, can I activate it for 9 hours rather than 8? Well, why? Because sometimes stay a bit later. And so it saves me having to reactivate. It's like, what's the point in putting these tools in place if you're going to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
So role by role determines the duration. GA, you want to have it as the least time possible. Help desk, absolutely do it 8 hours, even 9 hours if they, do slightly go overtime. But we shouldn't be backing down just because it's an annoyance to users because they've got to re-PIM themselves after X hours. It's good security posture. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone needs to extend, the length of the PIM, if you like, when they go through that process to re-authenticate and reactivate, they just adjust that slider for 1 to 2 hours rather than the full 8 hours. And that's also a process and a mindset, getting people used to doing that rather than just throwing it all the way to the end and activating it for the full period. Absolutely. One thing I'm interested in, and we spoke about it a little bit, I think, in the last episode, was I wonder if there's a way to use PIM to also bolster your sort of privileged access strategy when it comes to accessing your privileged access workstation. Because obviously there's so you could by default have no access to the PAW, and obviously in your case the cloud PAWs in the case of Azure Virtual Desktop requires you to have an Azure role initially, so you could sort of require PIM to activate either the role directly, the Azure role directly, or activate membership into a group that then gives you access to the PAW.
So in order to log into the PAW, you need to be part of a group.
Yeah.
So you could actually PIM that group for it. But equally, my thought process, I haven't put this down yet, but my thought process was, well, I've got the user group to log on to that port, then I've got the admin group. I wouldn't want the users in both the users and admins because technically you shouldn't be administrating your own PAW as your user account anyway because it's to be locked down.
Yeah.
But certain users you would want to have that as a PIMable group because you may need to do some maintenance on the PAW, for example.
Yeah.
But you could absolutely do that with using groups because the access is just via conditional access and you just allow access to the Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop apps through there. So you have a group that allows access when you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess from an end user perspective, assuming you're licensed for it, which again, it falls under the same license as it would for PIM, which is Entra ID P2. But users, I guess, could be governed via access packages, part of entitlement management. So you could manage access to those AVDs, if you like, through an access package, and at least then that provides some level of governance to that whole process as well.
Now, I think that would be under your P2 license, because some of the access package is via information governance. Microsoft was so good at that when you got all these nice features, but they were in preview, and then they released the identity governance license. And there's so much more but that's more user focused, I think, rather than privileged focus.
It is, absolutely.
And I think the other thing about licensing is I still need to find there is a Microsoft doc, but it refers to identity governance. So is that the identity governance, or is it the whole licensing package? Because it's bums on seats.
Yeah.
So I have my everyday user and I have my ADM user. Do I need to get a license for my ADM user? Now, reading between the lines, I think it's no, because I'm covered by my everyday user license. But it's all these kind of things. Absolutely.
So actually, Merrill, who you might follow on, so Merrill is obviously part of the Entra ID team. He's put out quite a lot of content, and specifically around the whole licensing piece. But to answer the question, yes, you're absolutely right. As long as you've got one license per human, that means they don't need to then license their administrator account, which is a topic that comes up actually quite a lot. And a lot of people tend to do it wrong. So a lot of organizations that I've worked with have actually gone ahead and licensed admin accounts, not knowing that actually you don't need to.
I think we touched on it in the last episode as well, was do admin accounts need productivity licenses? No. There's no need to assign them a Microsoft 365 license, because they're not going to be logging into email. They're not going to need Teams. You have your everyday account associated as the email address for that admin account. So notifications get to you, but actually there's nothing needed. Even things like Intune, they don't need an Intune license because that's targeted at the device, especially if you're doing it through AVD. It's all fine as far as I know.
No, I completely agree. I think there's some weird caveats. It depends on what you're doing. If you're doing bits and pieces in SharePoint, so I've had issues before where I've tried to moving data? I think it was moving data from maybe one user account to another, or from one user account to SharePoint as part of when a user leaves the organization. I've had clients before where they want to take the user's OneDrive data and put it into a central SharePoint site so that it can be accessed later. I'm sure there's a requirement there. I think the administrator needs a SharePoint. So there's weird caveats, stuff like that. But
it's like with whenever you're doing a tenant migration, now the admin roles are usually assigned the impersonation rights for Mailbox, but for SharePoint, you always need to assign a SharePoint license to the users, and that gives them access to move OneDrive, SharePoint files, etc., etc.
Right. Okay.
So the permissions just aren't there yet for the impersonation. I think that's where it's come from.
Interesting. I tell you, I do have a question for you. Very, very interested on this one, especially with coming from an MSP background. How have you in the past sort of handled access for third parties or vendors when they maybe need privileged access? Because obviously it's great if you can implement PIM for an organization and for sort of internal IT teams, but maybe when you've got third parties, managed service providers, people like that, would you enforce PIM on them? Because I always typically get a lot of pushback from them when you try and enforce PIM or the use of PIM.
Bottom line, yes, you should, but it's that famous should. You always get pushback, and it's this whole thing of if they can use a guest account in that respect, so they're logging in with their own credentials rather than creating a separate account for them. You should be able to do certain things logged in as an account with your own UPN as a guest in that. I mean, as an MSP, you would have that ability because you manage all your customers. Because otherwise, you're going to end up with hundreds and hundreds of accounts that would potentially have GA rights.
Yeah.
I mean, I logged on. I say I logged on. I had a customer that I worked with years ago, and it wasn't until about 2 years ago they finally removed my GA account. I hadn't logged on to use it, but I had an email from them, are you still using this? Like, no. So they then deleted it.
Well, at least
but they hadn't touched it.
Might have been 2 years later, but at least they got rid of it.
Yeah. I mean, and that was still using the old standard push notification MFA as well. Yeah. I mean, not that I had the MFA up on or I've got the MFA up on my phone, but I didn't have the MFA set up for them because I changed phones since then. And because it's an account that I no longer used, I didn't migrate it.
No, it is an interesting one. You make a good point. So I guess for Microsoft partners, they would typically be using the partner portal, which means they would be coming through as a I forget the correct terminology, service administrator, something along those lines. So they could come through as a specific type of user object.
Yep.
And I think now with the whole GDAP stuff, it's kind of falls on the Microsoft partner to implement some level of PIM as well. So you could, for example, the Microsoft partner could use PIM on their end to gain access to certain clients. So there's a lot of stuff they could do as well. It's almost like it's like a fine line of, well, is it up to you as the organization, the client, to sort of enforce these PIM requirements, or should the partner be doing it themselves? And I think it's a fine line.
Yeah,
there's a conversation to be had for sure.
I think both, really.
Yeah, great.
The partner should be demonstrating best practice, so therefore they should be using PIM. If the customer isn't asking for PIM, the partner should be asking why. But if the partner says, I want you to use PIM, there should be no pushback at all. Speak, fine, we will. Because, the customer who they're managing may have sensitive, I mean, all customer data is sensitive, but they may have extra sensitive information that needs that kind of control. And MSPs should be encouraging users to do best practice, I think. I mean, best practice isn't always right. Let's be honest. It's got to be tempered with real world experience. But things like you can't do second best for security. If it's an afterthought, what was the point in bolting the door after the horse has already kind of run away?
Yeah.
MSPs, I think, should be encouraging their customers to use these tools. And if they're getting pushback from the customer, they need to explain it a bit more, I think, as to why.
I totally agree. So I guess as we've gone through this, and I'm just sort of conscious of time, we've kind of talked about where you would typically use PIM, why it's important to use it. And we've kind of touched on some common mistakes. Is there anything else you can think of from a common mistakes perspective that people should be thinking about? We've touched on the authentication context and the Azure MFA piece. I think for me, and we kind of touched on the approval piece as well, which is don't just go hell for leather on approvals, because you are going to piss people off and they will decide to stop using PIM. I guess the other thing for me is just you do get the option to configure your notifications, the way the notifications work for PIM. Leaving them on the default typically is going to wind people up because it just sends more notifications than it really needs to. So at least maybe starting with the default, but actually taking the time to go back and updating them to make sure they're appropriate is something I would usually recommend. But is there anything else you can think of that
I think it's also
like to mention to the listeners?
Yeah, so obviously you have the duration of how long they can activate the role for. We also have the duration of how long they can actually be eligible for that role.
Yes, well said. Yes.
So it's, do they need it permanently, or do they only need it for 6 months?
Yep.
And I think that's where access packages can come into play. because they then get a, do you still need access to this role? Yes, no, and then it goes through for approval. That approval, absolutely, you need.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that's another thing that a lot of people seem to miss, because that's where you can start using access packages to your advantage.
Yeah, you could use it. Yeah, to be fair, I think you can even have that sort of approval or that extension process happen directly in PIM itself.
Yeah.
But to your point of assigning or making those users eligible for that period of time, there's a good scenario where you mentioned before about, you might have scenarios where administrators do need to be actively assigned, so they don't have to continuously go through a process of activating that role. If you're going to go down that route, at least back it up with this, continual assessment after 6 months. Do they still need that actively assigned role? And have an approval process in there, or justification process, whatever that might look like. So
you've got your permanent staff, so your help desk staff. So have that assigned permanently. But you may have a contractor and he's only in for 6 months. Don't assign that permanently to them. Just assign it for the 6 months. Yeah, and it expires. And then if they need it again, I'm always a fan of, probably isn't the right word, but I'm always for, if somebody has to re-request to get access again because they've lost it, that's fine, rather than them still having access when they don't need it. I much rather it happen that way round, because it goes back to that always verify.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. Well, I don't know about you, but this was an interesting chat, and I'm keen to see actually how we can sort of tie it into the wider privileged access strategy and include it with the privileged access workstation stuff. Yeah. So I'm gonna do some digging on that, because that's quite an interesting one.
No, definitely.
But this was a really good chat.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. And I guess for anybody listening, be great to hear about their experience using PIM. Yes. Any recommendations that they might have, or I guess common mistakes and things that they come up against, roadblocks around PIM. That'd be interesting to hear others' thoughts on that.
Or it's a case of, what do they do in terms of their admin assignment?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think, obviously, we've got so many ideas to talk about, but I think, one of them is, how should you go about configuring your cloud admin accounts? What's the best way there? And it'd be really good to hear what people are doing.
Totally agree.
Right or wrong, there's no one right way. There's lots of wrong ways to do it, and it's a case of, it's how can you best learn from other people's mistakes, I think, as well. Where somebody else has gone wrong slightly, what we can do to help you. Yeah,
totally agree. Well, this was a great chat. Thank you very much for your time, Andy. Thank you to all of our watchers and listeners, and I guess we'll see you in the next episode.
Yes, definitely.
Cool.
Cheers, Nate.
All right.
Speak to you later. Bye, guys.